I had been attending physical therapy for a shoulder injury after a car accident, and at first, everything seemed routine. Quiet treatment rooms, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of disinfectant and massage lotion. But one late evening, when the clinic was nearly empty, the sense of normalcy vanished, replaced by an unease I couldn't shake, as if something in the building was watching me, waiting, patient. It began subtly, with soft whispers from the far end of the hall, almost inaudible, so quiet I thought I was imagining them. But they persisted, echoing faintly off the linoleum floors and pale walls, sometimes seeming to call my name, urging me to look toward the storage room, where exercise equipment and folded mats were stacked. And when I turned, the shadows there seemed to shift slightly, moving with a life of their own, bending and stretching unnaturally. And I froze, heart hammering, telling myself it was my imagination, exhaustion, or the flickering lights playing tricks on me. As I continued my exercises, the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. I kept catching glimpses of something in the corners of my vision. A tall, thin figure, its limbs bent in impossible angles, moving silently, gliding instead of walking. And every time I turned to confront it, it vanished, only to reappear elsewhere in the room, closer, observing me, patient and deliberate. And the whispers escalated, low, guttural, unintelligible, pressing into my mind, repeating phrases I couldn't understand but somehow felt menacing, carrying a weight that made it hard to breathe, my hands shaking as I tried to finish my routine. The building itself seemed to change around me. Hallways stretched longer than they should. Doors I had checked earlier were suddenly open. Rooms that had been empty moments before seemed occupied, and shadows pooled in corners, stretching along walls, creeping across ceilings, bending physics in impossible ways, all while the soft, deliberate scraping of movement echoed through the empty clinic, circling me, always behind me, yet silent whenever I looked back. Once, as I was rolling a therapy ball across the floor, I felt a sudden icy hand brush my shoulder, heavy and deliberate, and when I spun around, the room was empty, yet the elongated shadow lingered in the corner, tilting its head, watching, patient, and the whispers pressed closer, whispering my name, mocking my fear, as if the building itself were alive, aware of me, tracking every movement. By the end of the night, I was shaking, exhausted, barely able to walk. But the terror didn't end when I left. Even as I drove home, the feeling of being followed, of eyes lingering just out of sight, stayed with me. And in the following days, every time I passed the clinic, every time I saw its darkened windows at night, I could feel that presence again, patient, waiting, silent, yet oppressive. And I realized with bone-deep certainty that whatever haunted that clinic had been there long before me, and it would remain long after, feeding on anyone foolish enough to be alone inside, vulnerable, and unaware of the darkness watching from the corners. I had been attending physical therapy after a knee injury, and the late evening sessions had always been quiet, almost peaceful, until one night changed everything. The clinic was nearly empty, only the faint hum of fluorescent lights filling the large treatment room. And I had just begun stretching when I noticed movement in the corner of my vision. A shadow that seemed too tall, too still, almost gliding along the floor rather than walking. And when I turned, nothing was there. Yet the feeling of being watched pressed against me like a heavy weight, making it hard to breathe, and I realized my heart was hammering uncontrollably, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. I tried to continue with my exercises, but strange things kept happening. Therapy bands that I hadn't touched were stretched across the room as if used. Chairs shifted slightly when I looked away, and the soft, whispering sounds returned, low and guttural, echoing off the walls, circling me, repeating my name in a tone that was both human and alien. At one point, I looked down the hallway toward the storage room, and the shadow was there again, taller, stretching unnaturally, bending at impossible angles, tilting its head as if studying me. And when I blinked, it disappeared, but I could feel it moving closer, the oppressive cold of its presence brushing my neck, making my skin crawl, and I froze, paralyzed with fear, clutching the mat as I tried to calm my shaking hands. The worst moment came when I was alone on the treatment table, waiting for the therapist to return. and the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. I heard the scrape of something moving across the floor, slow, deliberate, circling me, and then a cold pressure landed on my shoulder, icy and heavy, though nothing was there, and the whispers grew louder, now intelligible only in tone, not words, taunting, pressing into my mind, echoing inside my skull. And I realized with growing horror that the building itself was alive, feeding on my fear, observing me, reshaping the space to trap me in its darkness, manipulating walls, doors, and shadows. By the time the session ended and I fled the clinic, I was trembling uncontrollably, my body numb, heart racing, and even weeks later, the memory of that night haunts me. The oppressive shadows, the whisper circling, the cold, unseen presence pressing against me, and the knowledge that the physical therapy clinic isn't just a place for healing. It's a place where something patient, malevolent, and unseen watches, waits, and preys on anyone foolish enough to be alone inside after dark. Even now, if I pass the building late at night, I swear I feel that icy gaze stretching through the walls and floor, waiting for someone else to enter, vulnerable and unaware. I had recently undergone wrist surgery and was attending early morning physical therapy sessions at a small, privately owned clinic that was usually quiet. But that particular morning, as I walked in, I immediately sensed that something was off. The front desk lights were on, but no one was at the counter. The usual faint smell of disinfectant was sharper, almost metallic, and the waiting room chairs were slightly askew, as if someone had hurriedly left in a panic. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to fatigue or nerves, and proceeded to the therapy room, only to find that all the equipment had been adjusted precisely to my previous settings, something I hadn't asked anyone to do, and when I checked my chart, it had fresh handwritten notes describing stretches I hadn't yet performed, pain levels I hadn't reported, and a final chilling line that made my stomach knot. Patient resists when alone. I began my exercises trying to keep calm, but the atmosphere felt increasingly oppressive, as if the clinic itself was aware of my presence, and I noticed that the mirrors lining the wall were reflecting me slightly wrong. My movements lagged behind, my injured wrist bending farther than it physically could, and my reflection continued in exercise, even after I had stopped, frozen in a position that made my arm ache just by watching it. Panic began to rise, and I noticed subtle but unnerving changes in the therapy equipment. The resistance bands tightened slightly when I wasn't touching them. Weights shifted on their racks. A therapy ball rolled slowly across the floor toward me, stopping just out of reach, and each sound echoed unnaturally, louder and sharper than it should have, amplifying my anxiety. As I tried to leave, the hallway doors were locked and the exit signs flickered, redirecting me deeper into the building, toward rooms I hadn't passed before, rooms I didn't recognize on the floor plan, and my attempts to call the front desk on the clinic phone went unanswered, the line dead, though my phone had full signal. Then I felt my wrist being gently, deliberately repositioned, guided into a stretch I hadn't initiated, the pressure increasing slowly and painfully, and as I pulled away, I heard a calm, monotone voice through the intercom. "Please relax. Treatment improves compliance." My eyes darted around, and the pain charts on the wall lit up one by one, each marking areas of my body I had never injured, diagrams filling with red as though predicting future damage, my name written at the top of each chart, and I felt my panic spike, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run. When I finally broke a fire exit door open and fled into the cold early morning parking lot, I thought I was free, but as I checked my phone, I received a voicemail time-stamped while I was still inside the clinic, reminding me of my next session, already scheduled, already confirmed, and I realized in horror that whatever had been manipulating the clinic, the equipment, the charts, the lighting, the doors, had not only observed me, but had recorded every movement, every hesitation, every sign of fear, preparing for the next time I returned, patient, methodical, and unrelenting. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the memory, seeing the subtle cues of the clinic everywhere, the flicker of lights, the slight misplacement of objects, the sensation of being watched even in my own home, And I knew with an icy certainty that the clinic wasn't haunted in any traditional sense. It was alive in its own way, intelligent and calculating, and it was still waiting for me to return, waiting for someone else to enter. And I am convinced that anyone who goes there alone will find themselves trapped in a carefully orchestrated nightmare, their body monitored, manipulated, and observed until the building decides its treatment is complete.